I'm Tiara Click. Welcome back to the Leadership Lab. The last few videos, we have been discussing executive functions, and now I want to shift into the understanding piece, and we will leave off with more solutions, okay? Because we've discussed the awareness part, right? Awareness tells us what's happening. Understanding helps us to connect the dots. It helps us to ask, why is this my pattern? Where did this come from? And what does it mean about how I need to show up for myself? So, we are going to discuss more about why executive function struggles develop in the first place. And as we go along, you might realize that it's not what you think. Executive function difficulties, having challenges with your executive functions, are not character flaws. So, I just want to get that out of the way. But they are neurologically based, okay? They're also context dependent. It depends on the context of the situation. And they genuinely are just responsive to whether or not you've practiced them, if you have support in these areas, and if you know how to regulate. Okay, so they are responsive to practice, support, and regulation. So struggles with executive function can come from a few different places, but we're going to talk about five. Number one, development throughout the lifespan. So, what do I mean by this? Your executive functions develop throughout your childhood, throughout adolescence, and even in early adulthood, which they probably don't fully mature until you're like 25. So, a lot of people carry executive function gaps in spaces where they were never supported, right? You simply weren't supported on how to use that executive function, or they were never developed. You didn't practice them, right? If you still don't know all the executive functions, go back to one of our previous videos where we go through all of them and define each executive function. We will talk a little more about them in today's session as well, but if you want to just learn about them as standalone definitions, I recommend going to a previous video. Number two, why we might struggle with executive function, your environment and your stress levels. Chronic stress, chaotic environments, inconsistent caregiving when you were growing up, all those things can significantly mess up the development of your executive function systems. It can disrupt it, at least, but it can disrupt the development of your executive function systems. The brain was constantly prioritizing survival, not executive processing. So if you were in an environment or a state of stress so frequently that your amygdala was taking the front seat and your prefrontal cortex got shut down, that gets in the way of processing and gaining more skills with executive function, and inevitably you might struggle with them. Another reason someone may struggle with executive function could be because of neurodevelopmental differences, such as developmental or intellectual disabilities, ADHD, autism, other neurodevelopmental differences that have a direct impact, okay, documented impacts on executive functioning. If certain areas feel genuinely, no matter how much effort you continue to put in, that's important information. It's not failure, but it is a little different than the other situations where you might struggle because of environment, childhood, mental health, your nervous system state. If you realize that you genuinely can't hone in on a certain executive function, that is okay. No shame, no blame, but it's important information to figure out if it's actually because of a neurodevelopmental difference. The next reason you might struggle with executive function could be because of mental health. Anxiety, depression, trauma, all of these things affect your executive function capacity directly and like a lot, profoundly, okay? But this is not a weakness. Again, this can be healed. And lastly, we're going to discuss current nervous system state. Your current nervous system, the way your nervous system is either regulated or deregulated, your executive function capacity, so how much you can hold, how much you can actually do, changes. It changes whether you're well rested versus you didn't get a lot of rest. If you're exhausted, if you're in high stress versus low stress, right? These situations genuinely can affect your capacity. And if you end up being extremely exhausted, having a dysregulated nervous system because your emotions are all out of whack, you haven't learned how to calm yourself, soothe yourself, regulate yourself, all of these things matter, A dysregulated nervous system will throw all your executive functions right out the window. And I actually want you to think, when you're dysregulated, which executive function is the first to go? We'll circle back to that later in the video, but I want you to start thinking about that, because sometimes we have an executive function that is just not our strong suit naturally, like maybe time management on a daily basis, not because I'm dysregulated, but because that's just an executive function that I might need to strengthen. But then there's always those executive functions that are the first to go when you're dysregulated, right? So I want you to consider, which one's the first to go. Is it metacognition, your ability to be aware of what you're doing and kind of analyze the situation and gain information from it? Is the first to go flexible thinking? Do you become extremely rigid when you're overstimulated and your nervous system is extremely dysregulated? All right. I just want you to start thinking about that. Okay. Identifying your challenges and what's going on is not a verdict. Okay. It's just a starting point. We're getting a vantage point on our situation so we can see what's going on. The more you know, the better you can heal. A problem well stated is a problem half solved. You can't fix what you don't know. Why do you think cars have gas lights, check engine lights, beeps, seatbelt not on? To let you know. It's not a verdict. It's not to shame you. It's not to say, you didn't put gas in today, look at you. It's to say, that's what we need. That's where there's a challenge. That's where there's a gap. Fill us up. Okay. So again, I want you to think about some questions. Think about the executive functions areas that you flagged as your biggest limitation. Okay. Now I want you to ask yourself, when does that limitation show up the most? Is it when you're stressed? Is it when you're pressured, maybe by people or time? Is it when you're overwhelmed, overstimulated? Is it the certain environment? Is it too chaotic? Is it certain people that dysregulate your nervous system or make you feel a certain type of way? Maybe it's because you're not well rested. Think about these things. And then I want you to think about what conditions make it worse. Okay. And what conditions actually work better for you. Write it down. This is going to be your first piece of data for the solution phase. Next, I want to talk about 3 important truths about your executive function. Number 1, strength in one area can a lot of times actually help support your limitations or gaps in another area. So someone with exceptional metacognition and planning can actually build systems that compensate for weaker areas, like your working memory. Someone with strong emotional regulation can stay in difficult situations or difficult tasks a lot longer, despite lower sustained attention. Rather than trying to be equally strong in every area and everything, I want you to practice identifying your anchors, your core strengths, and build outward from them, because again, they can help compensate for your limitations in other areas. Okay. Number 2, regulation is practice. Okay. Not a destination. No one maintains like a perfectly regulated nervous system. All right. It just doesn't happen. The goal is not constant calm. Emotions come and they go, right? But it is a shorter recovery window, right? And much more tolerance for things when they do happen. With consistent practice, you spend less time being dysregulated. You end up recovering a lot faster when you are dysregulated, and you increasingly have the tools available to you. They become more available to you when you need them the most, the more you practice them. So again, regulation is a practice, not a destination. We're going to be doing this forever. For the rest of our lives, we're going to have to practice regulation. Lastly, your executive function is not stuck where it is. You can learn just as much as you can unlearn things, right? Because of neuroplasticity, every executive function can be strengthened. You can make them stronger with more awareness, with repetition, practicing, being intentional about applying them and strengthening them. But you have to be aware of what's going on. And remember, it's not going to happen overnight, but genuinely over time, you can change your executive function profile. It's not fixed, okay? Now, before we go a little deeper into the solution phase and we wrap up on this understanding, I want you to build your own executive function landscape. Okay, so go grab your pen and paper if you don't have it already and answer these 3 columns honestly. Okay, so I want you to draw on your paper. All right, column number 1, what is your strongest executive function? These come relatively naturally to you. Where do you tend to just show up well? Because that's just how it is, right? Column number 2, where do you find that you are developing a little more strength in this area, right? Or maybe it's a little more challenging just on a day-to-day basis. What areas are you working on or kind of inconsistent in on a daily basis, but you're trying to fill that gap, but it's one of your shortcomings, right? Sometimes I have access to these, sometimes I don't. They're not my strong suit. And column number 3, which is the first to go when you're dysregulated, right? Where you constantly struggle and need support, especially when your nervous system is deregulated. These are going to be your current bottlenecks. Okay. There's no shame in any of the columns. This is just a map, and a map is only useful if you use it to reflect on the actual terrain. Okay. If you need to check out the executive functions again, I will drop an image of the executive functions in the description below so that you guys can look at that so that you can fill out your columns a little more efficiently. All right. So by now you understand what executive functions are. You have all 15 of them written down or access to them in the description if you download the image, and how they map your daily life and impact your leadership capacity. You understand the nervous system states, regulated and dysregulated, and why the state of your body is the foundation for the state of your brain. You should understand the two-way relationship, that regulation supports your executive function and that developing your executive function skills gives you tools to regulate. Okay, these two systems feed off of each other. And we've begun to understand our own landscapes, where we are strong, where we're developing, and where we need the most support. Next, we are going to go into solutions. We're going to dive into each executive function again, what it looks like when it's limited, what it looks like when it's working, okay, when it's fully optimized. And most importantly, we're going to go over concrete, practical, research-backed ways to strengthen these executive functions. All right. We'll also look at the 3 categories of strategies for improving your cognitive bandwidth overall. We're going to talk about some body-based tools that you can use, some brain techniques that can help train your brain, and environmental design. So changing your environment, the things that are around you to help support your bandwidth, your cognitive bandwidth, your brain, and how much you can handle, your capacity, strengthening your executive functions. Okay. Because understanding yourself is powerful, but understanding yourself and then having a toolkit to actually do something about it, well, that's when the mind clicks. All right, we're about to go in depth. Each executive function, I want you to write down 3 things. First, I want you to recognize yourself in either the limited side or the optimized side. All right, so when I go over the executive function, I want you to write out or recognize at least, where do I notice those limitations? Does that sound familiar? Or which ones sound like, yeah, that sounds like me. I'm optimized. That sounds like me. Those are my strong suit. I feel this is the optimized side for me. All right. Number 2, I want you to pick at least one strategy that actually fits for you. Okay. As we go through, pick one strategy that actually fits for you. You can do multiple, but at least one. All right. One that you feel is worth trying and might work. And third, I want you to commit to trying that over the next week. You don't need all 15 strategies. You just need the right ones for where you are. All right. So number 1, we are going to talk about the executive function, response inhibition. Okay. So this is the ability to pause before acting or speaking or doing. Okay. So what does that look like when it's limited? You're in a meeting and it feels super tense, and all your peers or your colleagues say something, and then someone says something you don't agree with. Without pausing, you immediately interrupt and then you counter them like really sharply. Then the room gets uncomfortable, and afterward you realize you misunderstood what they were saying. That is what it looks like when your response inhibition is limited. When it's stronger, when it's more optimized, you feel the urge to jump in, but you actually take a breath and let them finish. You process what's actually being said, and then you add a response that moves the conversation forward. People notice you as someone who listens and thinks before they speak. So how do you strengthen your impulse control, your response inhibition? There are some ways you can do that. One, you can try the 5 second rule. So count to 5 before responding, count to 10 before responding. Just say, I need a break and can I come back in 10 minutes? Whatever you need to do, but just take some sort of break. A 5 second stop could save you from complete destruction. Okay. It just creates a gap between your emotions and that feeling and the action you want to take. Okay. You can also prepare a pause phrase. Like I said, give me a second. Let me think about that. This will buy you some time naturally. And if you have one in your pocket, then whenever you feel dysregulated, just pull that same phrase out. Let me think about that for a second. You don't owe anyone anything by just jumping in and responding if you're dysregulated. Use these tools. You can also do a body awareness check. Okay, so notice what's happening within yourself. My skin feels warm. My hands are shaking. My thoughts are racing, right? Treat these as like little signals that it's time to slow down. Once you know your body a lot more, you'll know when these check engine lights come on. All right. And practice in low stake moments. What does that mean? Be intentional and try to practice like pausing or using a certain phrase like, let me think about that, in situations that aren't super intense or situations that aren't so urgent. Just start practicing it so that it becomes an actual habit, so that if you are thrown into a chaotic situation or a triggering situation, you'll have already practiced this skill and it will come to you a lot more naturally. So think about that. And I want you to journal out, when does self-restraint, response inhibition feel the hardest for you? In which specific situations does that impulse, that urgency to react feel like it just sneaks up on you? Okay. Next is working memory. When this is limited, someone might have given you verbal directions on how to get to somewhere, how to get to a meeting room or how to get to the, next building. And they might be like, third floor, turn left, second door on the right. And by the time the elevator opens, you've already lost 2 of the steps. Okay. During extremely complex conversations, you might lose your train of thought mid-sentence and not really know how to connect all the pieces that you were supposed to try to retain. All right. That's what happens when your working memory is limited. All those mental sticky notes, they don't all make it on the board. Okay. But when your working memory is strengthened, you can actually hold a thread of information, a thread of complex conversation. You can track multiple considerations at once, and you can connect what someone just said to something mentioned 10 minutes ago. You follow multi-step instructions without needing them to be repeated. So here again, we have some ways you can strengthen this working memory. Write it down immediately. Grouping information into meaningful units, right? Instead of writing out a phone number just with no dashes and no commas and no parentheses, like put some gaps and make it a little song or a tune. Group 3 numbers together at a time. That's why numbers are actually broken down the way that they are. That supports our working memory. Everyone pretty much knows that you put the parentheses and a little dash after 3 digits, 3 digits, 4 digits, right? That helps. All right. You can replay something back, repeat what they're saying. After you heard instructions, say it back to them out loud. And also, there's brain training exercises everywhere. I'm pretty sure you can download an app right now to help with that. But notice where your working memory has some gaps. In what environments? Is it standard? Is it just daily your working memory has some gaps? Or is it when you're under pressure in certain conversations? Right? Is it when you're giving multitasks or instructions? Figure that out. Next is emotional regulation. If you are familiar with this channel, you know what regulation is by now. If you are new here, regulation is to be able to notice, understand, and manage your emotions. Okay. So, when your emotional regulation is limited, sometimes things like receiving feedback can send you into a spiral. Right? You feel humiliated. You can't focus for the rest of the day. You find yourself replaying the same conversation on repeat for hours. Small frustrations build into these disproportionate reactions when you're not regulated and you don't know how to regulate your emotion. It can impact your entire day or the way you respond, and then you do something you regret. Okay. Stuff like that happens when it's limited. When your emotional regulation is optimized, you're able to receive that hard feedback. Feel the sting, right? You can feel it because honestly, that hurt a little, but you can sit with it. You can sit with that discomfort without it flooding everything. You process the feedback, separate what's useful from what isn't, and then you return to your work within a reasonable window of time, right? So, strengthening your emotional regulation, you can identify what's going on. This is the notice piece. What emotion is this? How is it impacting my thoughts? How is it impacting my behaviors? You can build your own toolkit. What works for me? Moving around, music, talking to a specific person, or you can do some breathing exercises, dunk your hand in some cold water, dunk your face in a bucket of ice water. There's different things you can do. Everyone's different though when it comes to emotional regulation. So if a coping skill doesn't work for you, find a new one. It's okay. Everyone has different personalities and capacities. So one generic coping skill that works for a lot of people may not work for you, and that's okay, but don't give up. Don't be like, there's nothing that works for me. There is something that works for you. You just need to find something that works for you, your personality, and your capacity. So I want you to reflect, what emotion is the hardest for you to regulate? And what does it tend to be triggered by? Next up is sustained attention. All right. When this executive function is limited, let's say you sit down to write a report and then you find yourself checking your phone every few minutes, opening random tabs or reorganizing your desk. An hour passes and you've written 2 sentences. The task itself is not hard, but staying with it is. Now, when this is optimized, you can get into a workflow while distractions are still around you, they still exist. You're able to notice them and then return to the task at hand without losing significant momentum. Okay. You finish a substantial amount of work in a single sitting and you feel a genuine sense of accomplishment because of the completion. All right. So if this is not your strong suit, work with some time intervals, work in 25-minute chunks, right? Remove distractions, shut the phone off, lock your screen. There's this app called a Freedom app, and sometimes I lock myself out of apps for like 2 hours, okay? Connect the task to something that's interesting. I always say the best way to get into a state of flow, and you may not always be able to do this because sometimes we have to do work we don't enjoy, but the best way to get in a state of flow, I'm going to sidetrack here, is to find something that is equally challenging, interesting, and has a goal. All right. So for me, if I want to get in a flow state, I like assembling things, Legos, furniture. They're challenging because it doesn't come easy. You have to put things together, you have to think about it. But it's interesting because I'm engaged in it. I like doing it. I'm having a good time. And there's a goal at the end. When I'm done, there will be a castle. When I'm done, there will be a desk, there will be a chair. Okay. So when you're finding meaningful work, if you have the privilege to do so, I always recommend that people do things that are equally challenging and interesting and feel like there's some sort of payoff at the end. So think about that. And I want you to really consider the things that you're doing, your work, the things you try to get done, the tasks that you commit to. Okay. Now, again, you can't always find things that meet those standards, but try your best. But yeah, so here are some other ways you guys can check out here that you can improve your sustained attention. But I want you to know what kind of tasks are the hardest to stay focused on. Figure that out for yourself and then figure out what helps you to stay present. Next is starting the task. Okay. Task initiation. Sometimes that is the issue. Sometimes when I actually start, I can keep going, but the starting part, well, that's the problem. I keep pushing it off. I keep delaying. But once I get it going, the match has been struck. The fire will go, but I have to strike the match, right? So let's say your task initiation is limited. You have a project due and you genuinely want to work on it, right? Sometimes you genuinely want to do the thing, but every time you sit down, you find yourself doing literally anything else. Cleaning, snacking, scrolling. You know what you need to do, but you just can't seem to start. And then by the evening time, all that guilt has just compounded onto the problem. Now your other executive functions are starting to go out the window, like emotional regulation and flexible thinking and all that, right? Anyway, what does task initiation look like when it's optimized, right? It looks like when it's time to work, you sit down and you open the document. without prolonged negotiation or procrastinating or, trying to talk yourself out of it. You're not negotiating with yourself. You understand that momentum comes after starting the task. You've learned your personal on ramps and you use them. Okay. So if you struggle with task initiation, break them down into micro steps. Okay. Set some micro goals. Like when I tell you, sometimes my step one is to just put the laptop on the desk and then I'll take a 10-minute break. Come back, open the laptop. I'm going to go grab a snack. Sign in to the laptop. Okay. And then my next time when I come back, my goal is to write 3 paragraphs. So now I bump the goal up a little bit. And eventually you'll start to get into that flow, but give yourself some grace if this is really hard for you. I would also do things like be intentional. When it is 4 o'clock, I will go sit down and open this file, period. Get all the distractions out the way, get all the friction out the way, set your day up the night before. Prep your materials. If you struggle to go to the gym the night before, put your gym clothes at the foot of your bed, put your shoes at the foot of your bed, hang your keys on your doorknob so that you just flow through it and you actually initiate. Because if you have to shuffle through your drawers and there's all this friction between you and the goal, you are going to delay yourself excessively. And I also want you to reflect on what type of tasks feel the hardest to start. Why? And what helps you to get those tasks started? What have you seen work for other people? How can you decrease the friction between you and the task? Next up is planning and prioritizing. Again, each executive function is really connected to each other because if you can plan and prioritize, you can actually avoid a crash out, emotional dysregulation. You can avoid slipping up on time management because of your planning and your prioritization. But what does this look like when it's limited? You have a super hard project coming up and you feel overwhelmed before you even begin. Everything feels like it needs to happen first, right? I read somewhere that like once you have more than 3 priorities, you no longer have any. So if everything feels urgent, you have no priorities. Okay. So figure out how to actually prioritize things and understand what needs to happen first. Okay. But, anyways, when this is limited, when your planning and prioritization is limited, you spend time on small, easy tasks and you avoid the ones that actually matter, that propel you forward. Then days go by without any meaningful progress because you've been writing your name at the top of each paper because you thought that was the priority. Anyway, what does it look like when it's optimized? Well, you break the project down into clear phases. You can identify the first real step, and then you work in sequence of importance. When a task comes in, you slot it into the right order of priority without having to rethink the entire system from scratch. So you can strengthen your planning and prioritization by writing everything down. Just dump it out, right? Don't organize it as you go. Just let it all out first and then organize it. That works for me really well. Plan backwards. Start from the end and work backwards. Spend a day of just planning and prioritizing without actually moving things around. Just think about it. That is a success in itself. Identify the most important task before the day even starts. And then another one that I love to do is just visual boards. I actually have a Kanban board on my wall right here. Basically, there's 4 columns. I wish you guys could see it. There's to do, in progress, testing, and complete. And then I have note cards that I pin on each one. So my to-do list has a bunch of note cards. Then when I start doing it, I move it over to the in progress. Then when I'm like almost done or I'm showing people or like I'm putting up a draft, it's in testing. Or if I've already reached out, but I'm waiting for someone to respond, it's in testing. And then once it's done, it moves over to complete. Okay. That works for me. Vision boards work for me. Whiteboards work for me. There's a whiteboard right here with the to-do list. I have poster papers over here. So for me, yeah, planning and prioritization was actually one of my weakest executive functions, but because it was so weak and I have to put so many procedures in place, I actually think planning and prioritization is one of my strong suits because I can now teach people how to optimize their planning and prioritization. So That's funny enough, right? But I want you to reflect when you feel overwhelmed by a to-do list, what typically happens, okay? Check with yourself. And then what's something that can help you. Next, we have organization. Organization is creating and maintaining systems that help you keep information, objects, tasks in a manageable manner so that you can access them more easily, okay? So when this is out the window, when your organization is unlimited, your email inbox has 4,000 unread messages. Important documents are spread across 5 different folders. Your desktop, your downloads, all these things have so many different places. Nothing in here has a home, okay? When you need to find something, it's a 10-minute excavation every single time. The clutter is also a constant low grade stress. It's contributing to your emotional dysregulation, your nervous system dysregulation, right? But when your organization is optimized, which can support other areas of executive function, you have a consistent filing system you can trust. You know exactly where you put things, where to find them. Your mental energy gets preserved, right? The mental energy you used to spend searching is now free for actual work. Your environment starts to support your focus rather than undermining it, okay? This is important. So there's some ways you can strengthen your organization skills. Number one, make a place for everything, one home for everything. Where do things go immediately after they are done being used? Next, you can set calendar events, okay? You can color code, place things in certain categories, have a certain rule or restriction, 2 files only, right? Action needed, action not needed. Shuffle your inbox into 2 different folders. Everything else gets archived. Complexity is the enemy of consistency. So, organization isn't just about filing cabinets and folders either. Organizing your living environment, organizing your thoughts, organizing your speech, organizing your classroom, organizing your desktop. All of these things actually matter. So, I want you to reflect what areas of your life feel most disorganized and start to address that. Next, we have time management. All right. So, when your time management executive function is limited, you genuinely believe you can shower, get dressed, eat breakfast, drive 20 minutes to work in 30 minutes. And then you're late again, not because you don't care, but because your internal sense of time has been disconnected. All right. You have time blindness. This is a real challenge, okay? And it's neurologically based. So we're going to want to address that if that's one of your weaker points, okay? But when your time management is optimized, you have a realistic sense of how long your morning routine takes. And then you plan backwards from there when you need to leave. You build buffer time into deadlines, not just best case time, right? You're rarely scrambling because your estimates match reality, okay? So, some ways to strengthen your time management: do a time audit for 1 week, literally track how long things actually take versus how long you thought that they take. And that data is humbling, okay? But it is corrective. Use visible timers. I am a timer girl. I'm like, hey Siri, set a 10-minute timer. I'm like, hey Google, set an alarm for 3:15. Like, and I break it down. I have to. That's the way my brain works, okay? Um Add buffers by default, whatever you think it's going to take. Throw a little something on it, okay? And then time block your calendar. Like, this is another one that even I do. I even schedule personal tasks. Walk dog, take shower, do your makeup. Like, that kind of stuff goes on my calendar because I'm someone who struggles with time management. So then I want you to reflect, where do you most consistently underestimate time? What would help you build better buffers? And also, when do you overestimate time? Some people might actually struggle with time management in the other direction and be showing up like an hour early to places. So, yeah, that's a whole nother, I don't know about that one. But next, we have following through on long-term goals. Despite being frustrated, setbacks, boredom, you know how to complete what is in front of you. Okay, even if there's temptations and distractions. But when your goal directed persistence is limited, let's say you start a new health routine on Monday with real intention. But by Thursday, one imperfect day has you convinced that it's not working. So you stop. You started the same goal 6 times in the past year. The issue is not discipline at that point. It's not having the system to bridge the gap between your current discomfort and the future reward. You have to keep going. You have to be persistent. There's a goal in mind. Stay on track. Now, when this executive function is optimized, even when setbacks happen, you recognize them as a normal part of your long term goal, your long term pursuit. You return to the goal without a dramatic narrative. You have milestones that give you smaller wins along the way, and you keep motivation alive across the longer timeline. Okay. So, here are some ways you can support those areas: visible milestones, reconnecting with your why, having a protocol for when setbacks come up, track your effort. All right. Now, I want you to think of a goal that you've repeatedly started and not finished. What is derailing you? What's happening? Next is cognitive flexibility. All right. This is adaptability, not being so rigid, being okay with some adjustments. Okay. When your cognitive flexibility is limited, your morning commute can be disrupted. And then you spend the first hour of work irritated and distracted. A team project changed directions. And instead of pivoting with the team, you keep advocating for the original plan. Changes to a routine feel destabilizing in a way that seems a little out of proportion to others. But when your cognitive flexibility is optimized, when the plan changes, you genuinely consider the new direction with curiosity rather than resistance or an emotional blowout. You hold your opinions lightly enough that new information can update them. You can zoom out and see multiple angles before settling on a response and trying to be rigid and locking down what you want. You're a little more adaptable, maybe a lot more. Okay. So you can strengthen your cognitive flexibility. Be honest if this is you. Okay. Um, Set up some plan B thinking. Okay. Spend 5 minutes making a plan B before you even need it so that you're not thrown off. Practice shifting your perspective, even in like low stakes situations. Okay. Learn something new. Learning a new skill can actually introduce neural pathways that show your brain you could be a little flexible. You can learn something new. This exercises that cognitive flexibility. Okay. And also changing your language. Okay. Instead of this always happens, I can't do this, try to change your wording to, ooh, this is difficult right now. What could I try differently? All right. So I want you to reflect what kind of changes are the hardest for you to adapt to, and what does stuckness feel like in your body? Next is metacognition. I love metacognition. I don't know why it's my favorite executive function. Maybe I just love the word, but I also like being self aware. I don't know. So, when your metacognition is limited, that looks like if you study for an exam by rereading your notes and feeling confident, but when the test comes, you realize you only recognize the material rather than actually knowing it. You a lot of times will finish a task without noticing all the errors that you've been making on the way. And in hindsight, they actually seem pretty obvious. Metacognition is like being able to think and consider where you're falling short, where you're doing well, assessing yourself, learning how to monitor your own understanding of something, adjusting your approach. Okay. Because when we don't have metacognition and you can't think about your own thinking, it's hard for you to be self aware and adjust. Okay. So when your metacognition is optimized before a hard conversation, you think, I tend to get defensive when I feel criticized. I should watch out for that. That's metacognition. You're aware of yourself. You know what happens, and now you know what you need to be aware of. Understanding that when you study for an exam, instead of rereading the same notes over and over and over, the test could be a little different. The wording could be different. Before a project, you might think, I know I underestimate timelines. My executive function, time management, okay, is a little shot. So I'll add a buffer. That's awareness. You use self knowledge to preempt your own patterns, okay? So if you struggle with metacognition, practice thinking out loud, practice predicting before an event, writing down what you expect to happen, how you expect to perform, and then afterward, check it so that you can see the gap between your prediction and reality. Okay. Learn to journal, reflect. What did I actually understand? What confused me? What would I do differently? What did I gain from this? Ask yourself those kind of questions, okay? And also, you can check in midway through tasks. Halfway through, ask yourself, do I actually understand what's going on? Am I going in the right direction? How is this making me feel? What might I be missing? Okay. So I want you to ask yourself, what's a recurring pattern in how you think or work that you've noticed but still struggle to change? Next is working memory updating. So, when this is limited, a project could change midway through, but you keep working from the same original briefing because it's what your brain has stored. Okay. In conversations, you miss key updates because your mind is still processing something that was said earlier. You find yourself acting on outdated information regularly. All right. But when this is optimized, when new information comes in, you actually integrate it fluidly without having to reconstruct everything from scratch. Okay. You can track a dynamic or complex conversation or a project that tends to evolve rather than clinging to the version that you knew first. You can play a board game and the rules can change midway through and you can continue to have fun and enjoy, and the instructions update for you. You're like, okay, new rules are in play. Okay. So if you struggle with this, ask yourself stuff like, has anything changed? And make that a habit. Do an erase and rewrite practice. Play games where the rule does change midway. And reread before acting on old plans. So if something has been updated, just make sure you're constantly looking for anything important to reread in case there's been recent updates, instead of assuming that you remember the latest information. Next is inhibitory control. So, this is resisting automatic, tempting, or dominant responses in order to do what actually helps serve your goals. Okay. So, when this is limited, you're trying to eat healthier, but the chips are on the counter and you eat them on autopilot while watching TV. You open Instagram to check one notification and then you come up for air 45 minutes later. You make a sharp comment in a meeting that you immediately wish you could take back. But when your inhibitory control is optimized, you notice the impulse to check, eat, say, or react, and you have a pause or a beat of awareness between the urge and the action. That beat is enough to ask, is this what I actually want to do right now? And then choose intentionally rather than automatically. Okay. So I'll give you guys some time to look at the different strategies. If then plans, urge surfing, removing stimulus, meditation practice. Okay. And I want you to reflect what impulses or automatic behaviors most consistently get in the way of your intentions or shut your intentions down. Next is prospective memory. When this is limited, you fully intend to send that email. When you get to your computer, and you forget to send the email entirely. You're not distracted or careless. Your brain simply doesn't flag the intention at the right moment. Days later, it resurfaces and then you feel terrible about it. But when your prospective memory is optimized, then when you make an intention to do something later, you have a reliable system for actually capturing it immediately. You trust yourself to follow through because the system handles the remembering, okay? Not just your raw memory under load. Some ways you can strengthen perspective memory is putting a physical object in a weird place as a reminder, right? Your phone charger on your keys. The item itself and the environment ends up doing the prompting for you as a reminder, okay? Act immediately. As soon as the information comes in or the intent comes in, get it out of your head, make a note, put it on your calendar, do a voice memo. Don't just trust your raw memory, all right, for tasks that are meant to be set up in the future. Practice habit stacking. After I brush my teeth, I will pack my bag for tomorrow, right? Make a habit and stack them. This increases your follow through because it triggers an already put together autopilot. Set alarms, but use context, right? At 3 p.m., email the client about the meeting on Thursday, not just a 3 p.m. alarm. So I want you to reflect, what kinds of intentions do you most often forget to follow through on? And lastly is attentional control. When this is limited, you're in conversation and someone walks by, you lose the thread of what was being said. Open plan offices are agony. You intend to focus on one thing, you find your eyes and mind drifting to whatever is moving or making noise almost involuntarily. I used to struggle with this. Sometimes I still do. But when your attentional control is optimized, you can be in a noisy environment and still stay with the task in front of you. An open plan office isn't so distracting. You don't need walls and barricades and things to stay focused. When your attention does drift, as all attention does, you notice it and you bring it back with like minimal friction. You direct your focus like a spotlight rather than being pulled like a moth to the flame of everything that's a distraction. So, what you can do is design your environment in a more intentional manner. Practice simply noticing when your attention drifts, all right, with no judgment, acknowledging when that happens, okay, and then bring it back. Breathing focuses, breathing exercises every day, noticing when your attention starts to wander. So, practicing that. Think of things as one task and focus there. So, I want you to reflect what most commonly hijacks your attention, what helps you return to focus. Now, beyond strengthening your individual executive functions, there's something bigger to understand: your cognitive bandwidth. This is your mental capacity that you have at any given moment. Think of RAM on a computer, RAM, all right? The more you're running at once, the more stress, chaos, notifications, unresolved decisions, open loops, the less available capacity you have for the work that actually matters. The goal isn't just to strengthen your executive functions when you're by yourself or in isolation, but it's to build conditions where your brain can access those functions consistently. All right. And you can do this by regulating your nervous system. How do you do that? You can use body-based somatic tools. This regulates the nervous system to create conditions where your executive function can work. This is breathing, cold water, grounding techniques, movement, humming, gargling, muscle relaxation. You can try brain training techniques, focused breathing, urge surfing practices, journaling, learning something new, intentional planning. These directly strengthen the neural circuits underlying specific executive functions. And environmental support. So, creating an environment to do cognitive work on your behalf so your brain doesn't have to. This is like visible timers, using a whiteboard, parallel play, or body doubling, right? So working in the presence of someone else, even if they're virtual or if they're in person, but that kind of stuff, your environment supports your momentum, okay? I'm going to show you these pages. You can actually just screenshot, take a picture of that. All right. Be here for a couple seconds. Okay. So I want you guys to put down a personal action plan. I want you to make a commitment, a real commitment. Not 5, not 10. Don't make a bunch, just one commitment. Pick one strategy from each category, one somatic tool, one brain training practice, the ones you just screenshot, one environmental change, something like that, and commit to actually trying those tools this week. Write it down. So when I become overwhelmed, a somatic tool I will use is this. One brain training practice I will start is this. How often am I going to do it? One environmental change I will make is this. I will set it up by changing this in my environment. All right. Small, consistent changes eventually compound over time. You don't need to do a complete extreme makeover on your life, but you do need a new pathway, and you need to repeat it and be consistent until it becomes your default. So I just want you guys to remember that development of your executive functions is not linear. It's not going to be a straight path, okay? It will happen over time. You might take 10 steps forward, 7 steps back, 5 steps forward, 1 step back. That's okay. Just know a lot of times your executive functions can be strengthened, things can be unlearned or learned, and just figure out what works for you. If you want, try to find an executive function assessment. And then if you need additional support, find a qualified professional to help strengthen those executive functions, okay? Remember, when it comes to thinking about your executive function, your environment and your context matters. If you're not well rested or you have a lot of stress, a lot of mental health challenges, and things like that, maybe those are getting in the way of your executive function. Okay. This is useful information, and we want to start building awareness of our own body's performance when we're in high performance or low performance. These different conditions impact your executive function. Okay. Also, remember, strength in one area can compensate for limits in another area. So rather than trying to become equally strong in all the executive functions, identify which ones you're really strong in and build on those so they can support the areas where you might have gaps. And continue to practice regulation. I'm excited for you guys. I want you to actually drop in the comments the most important thing that you might have learned about yourself in this episode, and one thing that you can actively work on for the next 30 days. And I want you to reach out to someone and share this video with them. Remember, you are not broken. Your brain is literally doing exactly what it learned to do. The work is not becoming someone else, it's expanding what's possible for you. So we are regulating, reconnecting, and reimagining as always. Every strategy in this episode is a new pathway for you. And the more you use it, the more natural it becomes, the more your bandwidth expands. You have more capacity for things that actually matter, your leadership, your relationships, your life. All right. And when all of that happens, well, as you know, that's when the mind clicks. Okay. Like this video if something clicked for you today. Subscribe. We have new episodes every week. Drop your one commitment or executive function you want to talk about a little bit more in the comments, and download the executive functions paper that I told you would be in the description. And again, share this with someone who needs to hear that their brain isn't the problem and there's something we can do about it.